At 1 in the morning, my daughter collapsed at the door. Her eyes were bruised and her lips split. Sobbing, she confessed to me. My husband hit me because of his lover. I held her in silence. I helped her inside the house. And without saying a word, I put on my police uniform. I loaded the bullets. Then I dialed my lawyer's number. The plan starts now. I'm glad you're here. If you are watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. I had just turned off the TV and dropped onto the couch with half-closed eyes after a long, exhausting shift. Being a police officer in this town was not always a matter of life and death. But that day I had to break up a fight at the Rusty Anchor Bar, and then write the report until the early hours. My body felt heavy. I only wanted to sleep deeply. Outside on the street, dogs barked while the buzzing of motorcycles from local kids speeding by filled the night. It was already 1 in the morning, but the neighborhood refused to sleep. Surely, I thought, the boys are at the corner smoking and drinking beers like every night. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the noise so my head could rest. Suddenly, hurried knocks sounded at the door, so strong they made me jump up. My heart raced and my police instinct kicked in immediately. Who could be knocking like that at this hour? I walked quickly to the entrance, gripping a chair tightly just in case. Who is it? I asked toward the outside, my voice a little shaky, not from fear, but because I felt something bad was happening. No one answered. Only a couple of weaker knocks followed. Then a broken, trembling voice. Mom, open up, please. I nearly froze. It was Emily's voice, my daughter. I unlocked the door in a rush, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I opened it, Emily collapsed into my arms, trembling like a wounded animal. I hugged her tightly, feeling her limp body as if she had no energy left. Emily, what happened to you, daughter? I asked with a broken voice. The yellow porch light fell on her face and I froze at the sight. Her lip was split with dried blood at the corner, her left eye swollen and purple. She could barely open it. She clutched her stomach with her hands as if trying to hide a pain. My husband hit me because of his lover, Emily whispered with a trembling voice before breaking into heartbreaking sobs. I felt my blood boil, but at the same time my heart shrank. My daughter, the one I raised and loved more than my own life, stood before me shattered. I helped her inside, laid her on the couch, and rushed to the kitchen for a wet cloth and the first aid kit. Stay still, daughter, let me see, I told her, trying to stay calm though inside I was chaos. I gently cleaned the blood from her lip, but it kept flowing red and fresh, as if it were cutting through my own heart. The cut was deep. It wasn't just a wound on the skin. It seemed to carry a much deeper damage. Emily kept clutching her stomach with her thin hands trembling. I removed her hands, lifted her blouse, and, my God, I nearly dropped the cloth. A huge black and purple bruise covered her abdomen, as if she had been hit not once, but many times with cruelty. I felt breathless, as if the blows had landed on me. Emily, who did this to you? It was Mark, wasn't it? I asked with my voice shaking from rage and pain. Emily didn't answer. She only cried, and her sobs broke the silence of the house. Without another thought, I grabbed the phone and dialed the number I knew by heart for the town's emergency room. Dr. Lee, please get ready. I'm bringing my daughter over, I said urgently. My car was in the shop because the brakes were being repaired, so I called a taxi. While we waited, I sat next to Emily, covered her with a blanket so she wouldn't feel cold. Her phone, left on the table, kept lighting up. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw 7 missed calls from Mark and some messages flashing on the lock screen. Open your mouth if you want to lose everything, bitch. I felt the blood rush to my head. I reached out to grab the phone. I wanted to see more, to know what else he had done. But Emily, weak as she was, snatched it from me in panic. Mom, don't look. It's nothing. She looked at me with eyes full of fear, as if just touching that phone would bring everything crashing down. I didn't press her, I only squeezed her hand to calm her. I'm here, daughter. Nothing will happen to you. But inside I knew this had already gone too far. When the taxi arrived, I helped Emily get in, holding her with one arm while awkwardly carrying a bag with the other on the way to the hospital. Emily curled up, her head resting on my shoulder, repeating over and over, "Forgive me, Mom. I didn't want to bother you at this hour, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to run here." Every word she said was like a knife in my heart. I was her mother. I had promised to protect her for life. And now she had to come to me in the middle of the night, destroyed by the man she had once trusted. The taxi stopped in front of the hospital, where the cold white glow of a neon sign lit up the words emergency room. I helped Emily out, my daughter barely able to stand. Her body still trembled, and she pressed her stomach as if clinging to her last strength. I squeezed her hand, trying to keep her from feeling how wildly my heart was beating. "I'm here. Don't be afraid," I whispered to her, though I was terrified myself. Dr. Karen Lee, who was on call, was already waiting for us at the door. She looked at Emily, then at me with an expression of concern but said nothing. She only signaled to a nurse to take my daughter into an examination room. I followed, my feet heavy as if weighed down with lead. When the nurse removed Emily's thin jacket, I nearly lost my breath. In addition to the blows to her face, her shoulders and wrists were covered with marks of cruelty, purple and reddish bruises like silent accusations. I stood there, motionless, gripping the edge of a table, holding back the rage burning inside me. "What did that bastard do to you?" I thought, but I didn't dare say it out loud for fear Emily would break down crying again. Dr. Lee carefully noted each injury, her face serious. "We need to take an X-ray to make sure there are no fractured ribs," she said gravely but firmly. I nodded without speaking, only looking at Emily lying with her eyes closed, as if she wanted to escape reality. While waiting for the results, I went down to reception to sign the treatment papers for her, and to pay in advance. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. An unknown number appeared on the screen. I recognized it immediately. If someone was calling at that hour, right after Emily had arrived at my house, it could only be Mark. Rage rushed to my head, and I hung up without even answering. He didn't deserve to speak to me. Not after what he had done. When I returned to the room, Emily had half fallen asleep, surely from exhaustion. I pulled the blanket up with my still trembling hands. Seeing her face reminded me of Emily from before, the smiling child who ran after me in the yard, shouting, "Mom, look at me now." That smile had vanished, replaced by wounds and fear. I sat by the bed, watching her sleep with my heart in pieces. I was her mother. I had promised to protect her, and I had let her fall into the hands of a man like Mark. I blamed myself, but at the same time a flame of determination began to burn inside me. I could not allow my daughter to keep suffering ever again. After they put her on fluids and stabilized her, I took Emily home. I made her a glass of warm milk, left it by the bed, and quietly closed the door, making sure she was asleep. Dawn was breaking. A faint light slipped through the window. I stepped outside to tidy up the entrance and found Mrs. Linda Brown, the neighbor across the street, sweeping her porch. When she saw me, she hurried over, speaking quickly. "Did something happen at your house last night, Sarah?" I heard knocking at the door and some crying. I sighed and told her briefly that Emily had been beaten by her husband, thrown out of the house, and had come running to me in the middle of the night. Mrs. Brown clenched her teeth, her eyes blazing. How dare he treat his wife like that? That man has no heart. I nodded without saying more, but I felt I had an ally. Suddenly I remembered Mrs. Brown had a camera at her entrance. "Mrs. Brown, could your camera have recorded something last night?" I asked. She nodded immediately. She opened the app on her phone and showed me the video. I recorded with my phone the scene of Emily at my door, knocking desperately, her weak sobs echoing in the night. Seeing that image broke my heart again, but at the same time I knew it would be key evidence. I took Mrs. Brown's hand and thanked her from the bottom of my soul. She only held my hand and said firmly, "Don't forget to get justice for that girl. I trust you can do it." I went into my bedroom, opened the closet, and looked at my police uniform hanging neatly. The blue shirt, the khaki pants, the belt, and the gun holster. Everything seemed to be waiting for me. I took each piece, feeling the rough fabric under my fingers, in silence. I changed, buttoning each button and adjusting the belt. Every movement was like a vow. I was not only Emily's mother, I was also a police officer, and I would use everything I had to protect her. When I finished, I picked up the phone and called Michael Carter, the family lawyer. His voice sounded sleepy on the other end. "Hello." I was brief. "Michael, start the plan right now." He stayed silent for a moment and then asked, "Sarah, are you sure?" I answered without a second of doubt. Completely. Get ready. I hung up and went to the living room. I took my digital camera out of a drawer. I went over to the bed where Emily was sleeping. I gently pulled the blanket away and began photographing each of her injuries. The split lip, the black eye, the bruise on her stomach. Every time the flash went off, I felt that I wasn't just documenting the physical wounds, but also the deep damage to her soul. When I finished, I sat at the dining table and laid out all the papers and the USB drive with the video from Mrs. Brown's house. I connected the drive to my laptop and carefully backed up everything. Sitting there, watching the screen light up, I knew from that moment there was no turning back. I had entered a war not only for Emily, but for the justice I had sworn to defend. By the time I finished backing up the video from Mrs. Brown's camera, the clock read 8. Emily was still deeply asleep in bed, her face swollen and her lips dry and cracked, as if even in dreams she could not escape the pain. I quietly went into the kitchen and made a bowl of chicken soup. The smell of onions and herbs filled the air. I brought the tray to the bed and gently woke her up. She opened her eyes with a tired look and was surprised to see me there, dressed in my police uniform. "Mom," she murmured and then shook her head. "I'm not hungry." I sat beside her trying to make my voice sound as soft as possible so I could stay strong and keep going. "You need to eat." Emily looked at me with tearful eyes and reluctantly took the spoon, swallowing with difficulty. Seeing her like that broke my heart. Just a few years ago, Emily had been a radiant young woman, always smiling, filling the house with joy. Now she was there, shattered like a shadow of herself. I decided to take her back to the hospital for another checkup. The bruise on her stomach kept me uneasy. Dr. Karen Lee met us in the emergency room with a serious face but without saying much. She ordered a CT scan to make sure there wasn't internal bleeding. While waiting for the results, I sat in the waiting room, pulled out my laptop, and plugged in the USB drive. The video appeared on the screen. At 1 or 2 in the morning, Emily stood at my door, knocking desperately, her muffled sobs echoing through the microphone. Watching that image hurt my heart again, as if I were reliving that night. I copied the video to an external hard drive. I protected it with a password, taking care of every detail. I knew that what I was doing was not just to protect Emily, but to build a wall of evidence against Mark. At that moment, Emily's phone rang. On the screen it read, "Mark Johnson." I felt my heart stop. I grabbed the phone before Emily could react and shut it off immediately. She looked at me in terror. "Mom, if he finds out I talked, he won't leave me alone," she said with a trembling voice, as if just mentioning his name dragged her into darkness. I squeezed her hand tightly, trying to calm her. "I'm here, daughter. Nothing will happen to you." But I said nothing more. I only looked at the clock in silence. It was almost 10. I removed the SIM card from Emily's phone and put in another one I had already prepared. I didn't want him to find her. I didn't want him to have the chance to threaten her again. The CT results came a few minutes later, confirming that Emily had several serious contusions in the soft tissue, but luckily no internal bleeding. I exhaled, but the relief was fleeting. Emily's physical wounds would heal, but I knew the ones in her soul would take much longer. I took her home and called Michael Carter, the lawyer. "I have the medical report and the video from the neighbor's camera," I said bluntly. He told me to meet him at his office in the afternoon to gather the evidence. In the meantime, Mrs. Brown stopped by with a pot of hot chicken broth. "This is to help Emily get her strength back," she said warmly. "If you need a witness, count on me." I looked at her, feeling her sincere support, and my heart grew a little stronger. In the afternoon, Emily tried to rest but kept waking up startled from nightmares. I sat beside her, trying to calm her, but she only mumbled in fear. Mark pushed me, and Jessica was in the corner mocking me. Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. "Who is Jessica?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. Emily told me weakly that Jessica was Mark's lover, that she had come to their house several times, showing off shamelessly, provoking Mark to take it out on her. Her story was like a knife in my heart. I had sat at the same table as Mark. I had thought he was a decent man who would take care of my daughter, and now it turned out not only was he cheating, but he also let another woman humiliate her in her own home. Sitting by the bed, I took out my phone and photographed the bruises on Emily's wrists up close, including the clock so the exact time would be visible. With each photo I felt I wasn't just documenting the physical wounds, but also the pain my daughter carried. I knew these photos would serve as evidence, but they were also a reminder of what I had to do to protect her. That afternoon I took Emily to Michael's office with a portfolio containing all the evidence I had gathered. He opened it and laid everything out on the table: the photos of the injuries, the medical report, and the video on the USB drive. Michael nodded firmly. This is a pretty solid base. Now we only need to prove public adultery, and he won't have a way out. I clenched the handle of my bag, knowing perfectly what my next step would be. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a police officer, and I would use everything I had to make Mark pay. That night I didn't take Emily to my house. I didn't want her to be somewhere Mark could find her. Instead, I left her at Mrs. Brown's house, my trusted neighbor. She opened her doors for Emily to stay the night and promised to keep an eye on her. I returned home alone, my heart heavy. I took off my police uniform and put on an old jacket and jeans, trying to look like an ordinary person and not an officer gathering evidence. I pulled the digital camera from the drawer, checked the battery and the memory card, and drove off in my old car. Every turn of the wheels reminded me that I was entering a war not only for Emily, but for the justice I had sworn to defend. I parked the car in a dark alley near the Rusty Anchor Bar in Chicago, the place Emily had told me Mark frequented. The neon light from the bar lit a piece of the street. I sat in the car, crouched down, camera in hand, waiting. Around 8 o'clock that night, Mark's silver truck appeared. Its headlights swept across the alley. My heart raced, but I stayed calm and switched on the camera. Ready. A few minutes later, a woman stepped out of the corner. She wore a tight red dress, her lips painted a deep shade, and a cigarette in her hand. She walked with a provocative confidence. I recognized her immediately. It was Jessica Moore, the woman Emily had told me about. Mark's lover. The one who had made my daughter suffer. Mark turned off the engine, got out, and opened the door for Jessica, wrapping his arm around her waist with familiarity. Seeing him like that made my blood boil. He, the one who had sat at my table, the one who had called me mother-in-law, was now holding another woman while my daughter lay in a bed full of bruises. I fired the camera again and again. The neon light of the bar clearly illuminated their faces. Each photo was like a stab, but also another piece in the puzzle I was assembling to expose him. I followed from a distance to a small hotel with a flickering red neon sign. I didn't get close. I just stayed back and took a couple more pictures of them entering the lobby hand in hand. Then I drove to the parking lot and snapped a photo of Mark's truck license plate, making sure a nearby digital clock showed the time. Each photo was a bullet, and I knew I had in my hands what would leave him without escape. When I got home, I opened the laptop and transferred all the photos into a special password-protected folder. I called Michael Carter, the lawyer, with a determination I couldn't hide. I already have the photos of his infidelity. Their faces are clear, and the license plate is visible. Michael replied firmly, "Excellent, Sarah. Keep them safe. Don't let him find out you have them." I nodded even though he couldn't see me, feeling a little relieved knowing I was one step closer to justice. Just then my phone vibrated. It was Emily calling from Mrs. Brown's number. Her voice sounded distressed. "Mom, he just called one of my friends asking where I am." When she told him she didn't know, he threatened her too. I'm really scared. Hearing Emily made my heart tighten. My daughter, though she had already escaped from Mark, was still haunted by his threats. I reassured her. "Stay calm. Stay at Mrs. Brown's house. I've got him under watch." But inside I knew I had to act faster before he found a way to hurt Emily again. I immediately contacted Captain Harris, a trusted colleague at the precinct. I presented all the evidence I had gathered: Mrs. Brown's video, Emily's medical history, and the photos of the infidelity. "I need you to send a patrol to watch the neighborhood, especially Mrs. Brown's house," I said firmly. Harris agreed without hesitation, but not without warning me. "Sarah, what you're doing is very dangerous. But if you have enough evidence, I'm sure you'll win." I thanked him and handed him a copy of the photos of the infidelity in case something happened to me. That night I couldn't close my eyes. I sat at the dining table organizing all the data into files. Evidence of the injuries, the video footage, and the photos of the infidelity. Each file was like an accusation, another step in bringing Mark into the light. But in my heart I couldn't shake the pain. Had I ever considered him like a son? I had believed he would protect Emily. And now not only had he betrayed her, he had dared to raise his hand against her, to threaten her. All for another woman. That pain, like a deep cut, wounded me every time I thought of Emily's bruises. The next morning I took Emily to Dr. Clara Dominguez, a psychologist Michael had recommended. Emily needed help to overcome the trauma from the days of abuse. I stayed in the waiting room, my heart shrinking. Watching my daughter walk slowly into the office with her shoulders slumped was like having a stone placed on my chest. I, who thought I was a strong mother, a tough cop, hadn't been able to protect her from the man I trusted. That pain, like a deep cut, hurt me every time I remembered Emily's bruised face. While I sat there, my phone vibrated. It was John Davis, the clerk at the Public Registry of Property, whom I knew from previous paperwork. His voice sounded serious and a little hurried. "Mrs. Miller, it's not wise to talk much on the phone, but I just saw your name and your daughter's in a land transfer file. Something looks off." I frowned, not understanding what he meant. Emily and I hadn't done any transfer paperwork, but a bad feeling made me stand up immediately. I told Claire I would be back for Emily. Later, when I arrived at the public registry, John motioned for me to enter his office. He opened a file, frowning. "There's something strange here. This land was transferred to the name of a certain Jessica Moore last week, but since you didn't call me to confirm, it seemed odd." I froze. I felt the blood drain from my body. "That can't be," I exclaimed with a breaking voice. "Emily and I never signed anything." John shook his head and handed me the file. "The signatures are here with your name and your daughter's. And the paperwork is already filed." I took the paper and saw shaky signatures that looked nothing like ours. I immediately asked who had submitted the documents. John answered quietly. "The clerk told me it was your son-in-law, Mark. He said you had asked him to handle it because you were busy." Hearing that, I felt blood boiling in my head. Mark had not only beaten Emily, not only cheated on her, but had dared to forge our signatures to steal the land, the inheritance from my father, what my family had safeguarded for years. I tried to stay calm and asked John for a photocopy of the file. He sighed. Surely someone from inside helped him with the paperwork. Before I left, he whispered, "Mrs. Miller, this is dangerous. Be careful that it doesn't get out in the office that I told you." I nodded. I thanked him and promised I wouldn't betray him. But inside I felt like I was walking on thorns. Mark was not just a violent man. He was a manipulator willing to do anything to get his way. In the afternoon I picked Emily up from her therapy session. She looked tired, but her eyes no longer carried panic. I took her straight to Michael Carter's office with the photocopy of the forged papers. Michael reviewed them carefully, drumming his fingers on the table, and said firmly, "This is the final blow. Now we also have proof of fraud. Enough so he has no escape." Emily, sitting beside me, listened in silence, but her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, he dared to forge the signatures to steal Grandpa's land," she said with a trembling voice, torn between pain and indignation. I took her hand and squeezed it, trying to give her some strength. But I too was fighting my own pain. That land wasn't just property. It was a memory, my father's sweat, something our family had cared for generations. And Mark had dared to trample on it all for nothing but his ambition and betrayal. That night I met with Captain Harris and handed him a copy of the forged documents. He nodded with a serious look. "Your evidence is very solid. I assure you he won't get away." I thanked him, but the weight in my heart remained. When I got home, I locked all the documents away in the small safe in my bedroom. The clock read nearly midnight, but I wasn't sleepy at all. I sat in the dark thinking about Mark, about what he had done to Emily, to our family. That pain, like a slow fire, burned me and pushed me forward at the same time. I knew it was time to confront him directly. There was no other choice. On Saturday morning, I left Emily at Mrs. Brown's house, the safest place for her at that moment. Captain Harris had assigned someone to watch outside, and I knew she would be protected, but my heart was far from calm. I put on civilian clothes, an old jacket and jeans, but hid in my bag a file with the evidence I had carefully prepared. The photos of Emily's injuries, the neighbor's video, the hospital report, and the photocopy of the forged land papers. I drove my old car to Johnson's pawn shop. The place where Mark ran his business and flaunted his power in the neighborhood. Every turn of the wheels reminded me this was no simple trip. It was an inevitable confrontation. The pawn shop was open. The smell of machine oil and cigarettes hit me in the face. Two of Mark's thugs were arranging things on the shelves and glanced at me from the corner of their eyes when I walked in. One of them smirked mockingly. Look, the mother-in-law showed up. I ignored them and walked straight to the office in the back, where Mark sat counting money, stacks of bills piled on a wooden desk. He lifted his head and gave me a fake smile. What's the matter, mother-in-law? A cop with so much free time has time to visit her son-in-law. His voice dripped with sarcasm, but I ignored it. I hadn't come to argue or chat. I laid the file on the desk. Each page was an accusation. The photos of Emily's bruises, the video from Mrs. Brown's camera with my daughter crying in the night, the hospital report detailing her injuries, and the photocopy of the forged papers he had dared to sign for me and Emily. Mark glanced at them. His face changed for an instant, but he quickly recovered his air of confidence, hiding it with a scornful smile. And what about these little papers? I've got better lawyers than you. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice cold. I didn't come to argue with you. If you want to see who's right, we'll see each other in court. He stood up abruptly, his voice restrained as if his pride had been struck. Who's going to dare touch me? Who's going to stand against me in this town? I didn't flinch. I stared straight into his arrogant eyes. Me. Don't think everyone is afraid of you. The two men at the entrance started to move closer, but I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket, letting my police badge show. They froze instantly, their eyes avoiding mine. Mark turned red, slammed the desk hard, and almost shouted, "Your daughter is weak. She deserved to be taught a lesson. And don't think that badge will always save you." Hearing that made my blood boil. He dared to say that Emily, my daughter, whom I loved more than my life, deserved to be taught a lesson. He dared to justify the bruises, the nights Emily had to flee in pain. I wanted to scream, to lunge at him and grab him by the neck. But I held back. I didn't answer. I simply gathered the file in silence, put it back in my bag and turned to leave. Before going, I turned back and said firmly, "Let me make this clear. From now on, the rules of the game have changed. You're not the one who's going to teach anyone. The law is going to teach you." Mark shouted behind me, "If you walk out that door, you're no longer my mother-in-law, and don't complain if I come after you." I stopped. I looked at him one last time without a trace of fear. "Well, consider yourself no longer my daughter's husband." I walked out to the street, where the wind lifted the dust from the dirt road. I got into the car and called Michael immediately. "It's time to file the lawsuit." Michael replied with a calm but cautious voice. "All right. Get ready. He's going to fight back with everything." I nodded, though he couldn't see me, my heart cold as steel. I knew this war wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. A few days after my confrontation with Mark at the pawn shop, rumors began spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire. Early in the morning, I went to the market for some vegetables, trying to act normal, but whispers reached my ears. Two women at the corner stall whispered, "That Emily surely made it up. They say she used to talk back to her husband a lot. That's why he hit her." I passed by them and they went silent, but their eyes followed me as if I were the one causing trouble. At the cafe next door, an older man sipped his coffee and shook his head. "Sarah is just using her badge to mess with her son-in-law." Hearing that felt like a dagger to my chest. These people who greeted me every morning, who smiled at Emily when she was a child, now so easily believed Mark's lies. I lowered my head and hurried on, trying to keep them from seeing my eyes fill with tears. At noon, Michael called me to his office. He placed a stack of papers in front of me with a grave voice. "Mark just hired Richard Wilson, a lawyer from Chicago. He filed a countersuit. Says Emily made everything up to extort him, and that you're abusing your authority as a police officer." I took the lawsuit. I saw Wilson's signature in fresh blue ink. The words on the paper felt like direct accusations against Emily and me, as if we were the villains trying to ruin Mark's life. Emily, sitting beside me, turned pale and said with a trembling voice, "Mom, he wants to make me look like a liar." Seeing her made my heart ache. Emily, my sweet daughter, now had to endure not only the bruises on her body but also the slander of the man she once loved. I took her hand and squeezed it, trying to give her a bit of strength. But inside I felt indescribable pain. I had thought this town where I was born and raised would be on our side. But now it seemed the whole world was turning its back on us. In the afternoon I took Emily to Mrs. Brown's house. Passing through an alley I saw two of Mark's thugs standing there smoking, staring at us. One of them raised his chin and said sarcastically, "Careful. Around here, people believe Mark more than they believe you." I didn't answer. I only squeezed Emily's hand and hurried her inside the house. But those words hit my heart like stones, making me feel lonelier than ever. I immediately called Captain Harris to inform him of the threat. He promised to reinforce the patrols at night, but his voice also sounded worried. "Sarah, be careful. That man is trying everything to flip the situation." I nodded and thanked him. But inside I knew I was walking down a very dangerous path. That night I went to the little corner store to buy something to eat. The owner, someone I'd known for years, pulled me aside and whispered, "Sarah, be careful. People were saying everywhere that I had made everything up to steal the land from my son-in-law." Hearing that sent a chill through my body. The people who had been my neighbors with whom I had shared stories now believed I was a schemer. I thanked the shopkeeper and tried to smile, but when I stepped out of the store, I felt like the world was crashing down on me. When I got home I found an envelope with no name slipped under the door. Inside was a note with messy handwriting. "Shut up or lose your daughter." I took the paper. My hands trembled, but not from fear. I was furious. Furious that Mark dared to threaten my daughter. Furious that people around me let themselves be manipulated so easily. I carefully filed the note into the evidence folder, knowing it would be another piece to expose him. Late that night, I met urgently with Michael in his office. He saw the threatening note and nodded slightly. Good. The dirtier he plays, the more he ties himself up. But public opinion is on his side. We need a strong blow to turn things around. And the only one who can do that is Jessica. Hearing Michael mention Jessica, I felt a small light of hope spark in the darkness. Mark's mistress could be the key to turning the situation around. But I also knew bringing her to our side wouldn't be easy. I stayed there in the dimly lit office, thinking of Emily, of the bruises on her body, of the lies suffocating us. That pain like a slow fire burned me and pushed me at the same time. I wasn't going to let Mark win. I wasn't going to let his lies hide the truth. The day after the tense confrontation at the pawn shop, I learned that Jessica often went to a small bar at the end of Main Street. I knew it was my chance to change the course of the game, to turn around the match Mark thought he had already won. I put on a wide jacket and a cap, trying to stay unnoticed as I entered the place. Ranchera music blared, cigarette smoke floated in the air, and the smell of beer and tequila mixed around me. I chose a table in a dark corner. I sat down and didn't take my eyes off the door. I didn't want to be recognized. I didn't want any of Mark's people to see me before I could talk to Jessica. Around 10 at night she appeared, wearing a short, tight dress, her lips painted a deep red, and a cocktail in her hand. She walked with a confidence that seemed forced. I looked at her and felt a mix of rage and pity. This was the woman who had contributed to my daughter's suffering, but at the same time I knew she was only a pawn in Mark's game. I took a deep breath, stood up and sat across from her. Jessica raised an eyebrow and asked defensively, "And who are you?" I didn't answer right away. I just placed an envelope on the table in silence. Inside was a copy of the forged land papers Mark had arranged, along with Jessica's bank statement full of accumulated debts and at risk of foreclosure. I looked her straight in the eyes and said sharply, "I'm Mark's mother-in-law. If you stay on his side, you'll go down with him, but if you cooperate, you'll save yourself." Jessica let out a mocking laugh, but it faded the moment she opened the envelope and saw the papers. Her face went pale, her gaze wavered as she saw the fake signature on the transfer and the red figures of her debts. I continued with a cold but firm voice. "Captain Harris already knows everything. As soon as the trial begins, they'll call you to testify for fraud, and you could even face a serious sentence. Is that what you want?" Jessica stayed silent for a long while. The hand holding her cocktail trembled. She downed the drink in one gulp as if to gather courage and then said in a shaky voice, "Mark promised me he'd give me a share of the land. He said everything would turn out fine, that I would have it all. But now I understand. He just used me. Hearing her, I felt a bit of pity. Though she had been wrong. Jessica was another victim of Mark's manipulation. But I didn't let emotions win. I stared at her. You have one last chance to come out clean. Tell the truth in court. I'll take that into account. Just then the bar's door swung open and Mark's two thugs walked in. They looked around and their eyes locked on me sitting with Jessica. They approached with hostile faces. Without hesitation, I pulled my police badge from my pocket and placed it on the table. Want to try it? Go ahead. The dim light of the place gleamed on the badge, and the two men froze, slowly backing toward the door, their eyes still full of hate. Jessica was breathing hard, pale as paper, clutching the edge of the table. I looked at her and said in a grave but resolute voice, "You see, Mark can't protect you. He's only going to drag you down with him." Jessica bit her lip. Her eyes wavered between fear and determination. Finally she nodded. "All right, I'll testify. But you have to promise me I'll be safe." I didn't promise much, only nodded. "If you do the right thing, I'll do everything I can." I immediately called Captain Harris, told him the situation, and asked him to arrange a safe apartment on the outskirts where Jessica could hide. As I left the bar, I walked down the cold, dark street. The wind made me shiver, but inside I felt great relief. I knew the battle had shifted. Mark had just lost his most important piece. On the morning of the trial, I woke up at 5 when the sky was still dark. I went to the kitchen and prepared a light chicken broth. The gentle aroma seemed to ease the tension in the house. I brought the tray to the bed where Emily was still sleeping. Seeing her there, her face still a little swollen and her lips dry, squeezed my heart. I woke her carefully, whispering, "Eat something, sweetheart, so you'll have strength." Emily opened her eyes with a tired look but nodded and sat up slowly. I helped her put on a long light blue dress and wrapped a thin scarf around her neck to cover the bruise still showing. I fixed her hair and told her softly, "You don't have to bow your head anymore." Emily looked at me with teary eyes but said nothing. She only held my hand as if it were the only way to feel safe outside the house. Captain Harris was already waiting for us with a patrol car. He greeted me with a nod. His look was serious but warm. "I've arranged an escort for you, Sarah. Today everything will go well," he said. I thanked him, feeling a bit of relief knowing I wasn't alone. On the way to the courthouse, I saw townspeople gathered in the square, whispering. Some looked at us with curiosity, others nodded slightly as a sign of support. But there were also those who shook their heads with distrust, repeating the rumors Mark had spread. They still hung in the air, and I knew today's battle was not only against him but also to reclaim the truth. When we arrived at the courthouse entrance, I saw Mark. He stood in an impeccable suit, his face red, his gaze sharp as a knife. At his side, Richard Wilson seemed calm, but I knew he was tense. Jessica was also there, standing far from Mark, arms crossed, eyes lost. Seeing her reminded me of that night in the bar when I convinced her to switch sides, and I felt a spark of hope. But I knew today would not be easy. I took Emily's hand and guided her into the courtroom. Inside, the place was packed. The old wooden benches creaked as people settled in. I saw Mrs. Brown in the last row. She nodded at me to give me courage, as if saying she would always be there supporting us. Judge Robert Anderson entered, and the entire courtroom rose to its feet. The air felt heavy. Only the hum of the ceiling fan could be heard, like the heartbeat of the room. Michael began. His voice was deep and steady. He presented the case. Each piece of evidence was shown to the court. The photos of Emily's injuries, Dr. Karen Lee's report detailing the wounds, the video from Mrs. Brown's camera recording my daughter's cries in the middle of the night, and the copy of the forged land papers John Davis had provided. When Michael projected the video on the screen, Emily's pounding on the door and her weak sobs filled the courtroom. I heard murmurs among the people. Some wiped tears from their eyes. I looked at Emily by my side. Her hands trembled and her head was bowed. I placed a hand on her shoulder and squeezed gently, as if to tell her I was still there, that I always would be. Richard Wilson rose to refute. His voice was cutting. Emily made everything up to extort my client. Sarah Miller abused her authority as a police officer to coerce and slander. Those words were like daggers in my heart. I wanted to leap up, to shout that he was lying. that Emily's bruises were no invention. But Michael signaled me to stay calm. He then presented Mark's threatening messages, clearly displayed on the large screen. "Shut up if you don't want to be replaced." The courtroom fell silent. Emily lowered her head, her hands trembling harder, and I knew she was remembering the months she had lived in fear. I squeezed her shoulder, trying to lend her some of my strength. Then it was Jessica's turn. She took the stand, trembling, her eyes uncertain. "Mark promised me he'd give me a share of the land," she said with a shaky but clear voice. "He pressured me to accept the transfer papers, saying everything was arranged. But the truth is he forged his wife's signature to steal the land." Mark leapt to his feet, shouting, "You betrayed me!" The court guards had to force him back into his seat, while Judge Robert Anderson said sternly, "Order, or I will have you removed from the courtroom." Jessica lowered her head but continued her testimony. Each word was like a hammer smashing through Mark's lies. Seeing her gave me a small sense of relief, though I couldn't escape the pain in my heart. She had been part of Emily's suffering, but now she had chosen the side of truth. When it was my turn, I took the stand and swore before the court. I looked directly at the people, my voice firm. "I am a police officer, but today I am here as a mother. I will not allow anyone, not even my son-in-law, to destroy my daughter and mock the law." I pointed at Mark without a trace of fear in my eyes. "That man is not a husband, not a father. He is only an abuser and a liar." The whole courtroom murmured. Some of the people who had believed Mark looked confused. I saw Mrs. Brown's gaze. She nodded, as if telling me I had done the right thing. Finally, Judge Anderson stood to read the verdict. His voice was grave and clear, though I didn't hear each word. I only knew he ordered a protection order for Emily, froze all of Mark's assets, annulled the land transfer, and sent the case to the district attorney's office to investigate the crimes of usury and domestic violence. A rumble of murmurs filled the courtroom. Mark collapsed into his chair, his face pale, as if all his strength had drained away. Wilson was silent, removing his glasses to wipe the sweat. I took Emily's hand and led her out. The midday sun blazed on the courthouse steps, and I heard people whisper, "Sarah won. Justice won." But inside I knew this victory didn't erase the wounds Emily had suffered. I only hoped that from today she could begin to find her smile again. That afternoon, when Judge Anderson finished reading the verdict, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. I didn't catch every word, but when I saw Mark slump in his chair with a pale face, I knew we had won. The ruling imposed a protection order for Emily, froze Mark's assets, annulled the fraudulent land transfer, and sent the case to the district attorney's office to investigate domestic violence and usury. When I took Emily's hand and we left the courthouse, the midday sun shone on the steps, and I heard people whisper, "Sarah won. Justice won." But inside I didn't feel victorious. I only felt relief, as if I had shed a great weight. The pain was still there, like a scar that would never fully heal. That same afternoon, the police went to Johnson's pawn shop to arrest Mark. People crowded the street to watch. Some whistled, others shouted insults at his face. I wasn't there. But the next morning, when the Chicago Tribune published a photo of Mark in prison clothes, his hands in cuffs, under the headline "Pawn Shop Owner Arrested for Domestic Violence and Land Fraud," I felt something strange. It wasn't joy. It was a kind of release. He who had sat at my table, who had called me mother-in-law, was now paying for what he had done. But that feeling was quickly replaced by sadness. I had trusted him, thought he would take care of Emily. The pain of being betrayed by someone in the family, like a slow fire, still burned inside me. Jessica disappeared from town a few days after the trial. Rumor had it she had gone to Chicago to find work, to start over. I didn't blame her. She had been part of Emily's pain, but in the end she had chosen the truth. Mark's two thugs, the ones who called themselves the Chamuco, were also arrested for threatening witnesses. The neighborhood suddenly felt calmer. No more hateful stares, no more silent threats. But I knew the wounds Mark had left in Emily and me wouldn't fade so easily. Emily moved in with me permanently. The first days she could hardly sleep. She woke startled every night, sweating, screaming, "Mom, he's coming." In those moments I sat by her side, held her hand and whispered, "It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe now." But when I looked at Emily, I saw myself years ago when I too kept silent about my own pain. I took her to Dr. Clara Dominguez, the psychologist. Every week without fail, Clara listened to Emily with patience, helping her face her nightmares step by step. After a few weeks, I began to notice a change. Emily no longer covered her face when going out, no longer lowered her head when walking through the market. One afternoon I found her in the kitchen making enchiladas, and while folding the tortillas she sang softly. That song, as gentle as the wind, brought tears to my eyes. It had been so long since I had heard my daughter sing. It was as if the sun were returning to the house. The town also began to change its attitude. The neighbors who had doubted, who had believed Mark's rumors, now greeted me. Some came over to apologize in embarrassed voices. "Mrs. Miller, we didn't know the truth." I only nodded without resentment. I understood that Mark's lies had been convincing, and not everyone has the courage to stand up to someone like him. Mrs. Brown came to visit with a tray of sweet bread and hugged Emily tightly. "You came out stronger than your mother in her time," she said tenderly. Seeing them laugh together warmed my heart, as if kindness still existed despite the dark days. I continued my work at the precinct. Each daily patrol was a reminder of my duty. Every time I encountered a case of violence, I felt more determined to help other women break the silence. Once I found a young woman crying outside the station, her eyes red, clutching her bag. I sat beside her and said softly, "You're not alone. My mother went through it, my daughter went through it, and so did I." I stayed silent once, but now I know silence only feeds the monster. The young woman looked at me. The tears kept flowing, but there was a new light in her eyes. I knew I couldn't erase her pain, but at least I could show her there was someone willing to listen. A few months later, Emily felt strong enough to go back to work. She got a job at an accounting office downtown. That night she came home late. She opened the door with a radiant smile. "Mom, I got the job." I stood up and hugged her with all my strength, and we both cried. They weren't tears of pain but of joy, of freedom. Seeing Emily there, smiling like the sun, reminded me of the little girl who used to run after me in the yard shouting, "Mom, look at me." I knew the wounds in her heart were still there, but she was learning to move forward, to find herself again. That night I sat on the porch. The wind blew fresh. I remembered the night Emily collapsed at my door with her face full of bruises, telling me with a trembling voice what Mark had done to her. I remembered the months of struggle, the sleepless nights, the moments when I thought I would break under the lies and distrust of the whole town. But then I looked at Emily's smile today and thought, justice sometimes takes time, but when it comes, it can give you back your breath, your laughter, and even your future. I took a sip of my coffee, already cold, but felt a peace in my heart I hadn't felt in a long time. Emily had come back, and I, though carrying the scars of the past, had found a reason to keep fighting. Not only for my daughter, but for all the women who need someone to stand up for them. The story we've told is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think how many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes. I'm truly curious. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I'll leave you with two of the channel's most loved stories. I promise they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.